Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Freedom of Conversation podcast. If you heard us last week, I was talking with my friend David about programming. And this week, we will be talking about the importance of travel. And here with me today is Lainey. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for coming over and recording this with me. You actually have a special connection with another guest that we had on this show.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys listened to the episode with Randy, but I would say you guys are pretty good friends. Right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty good way to classify it, right? Nothing more, for sure.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah, he's only my boyfriend
Right,
for
yeah.
almost 2 years, but,
Right.
yeah.
But yeah, with that, let's get into the conversation of travel. So why exactly or what brings you here to talk about travel?
You asked me?
Yeah. Oh, that's very true. But why is it important to you?
Yeah, I'm just kidding. So when I was 11 was probably my first trip out of the U.S. to Canada with my family, but that wasn't really where it was super influential. I think it was, I'm from a town at the time was probably about 35,000, 40,000 growing up in Columbus, Indiana. And they actually have a really big diesel engine company called Cummins. So there's a lot of people from different cultures that come there. And my parents were always open to kind of encouraging us to know about the world and being educated. And so kind of my point of, I guess, partly wanting to get further away from my hometown because I knew there was a world out there, was when I was 14. I did like a volunteer thing through a church for a spring break in Mexico. And that was pretty cool. It was a lot of service related stuff in an indigenous town. One of the people who lived in my hometown, she was from this place. I don't know. It's pretty cool that she found her way in Indiana. I don't know how that happened, but she also had a nonprofit for helping Spanish-speaking families, essentially. And so she took us down there. So that was kind of a starting point, but I started taking German in 8th grade when I was able to take a language. And then in high school, just I think any opportunity I could to travel. I did a lot of fundraising to go. The first time my parents encouraged me to go like across the pond, I guess if you would call it, was to Germany for 3 weeks to do a cultural immersion program with our sister city in my so we went there.
So that was for like a school program?
Yeah.
Like a study abroad kind of thing? That's really cool.
Well, it was more of a cultural immersion because I only had 2 years of German. So,
okay.
So that was interesting. It was more, I stayed with the host family. The individuals who came from Germany stayed with us. We had two different, a young man, I guess I should say, and a young woman stayed that were a couple of years older than me in their school. And their school system's different, but their English was a lot better than my German at the time. But,
I gotcha.
So I got to host 2 German students for a week, and then they kind of traveled to the part that really, for me, influenced me with kind of my love for Germany and wanting to hopefully live there one day at the time. Who knows where life will take us post-COVID,
right.
Hopefully when we get there one day.
For sure.
I should preface too, like, traveling is great.
When you can do it.
Don't go right now across the pond during COVID. That might be a good idea. So not right now, but, pre and hopefully post-COVID, we can go back to exploring the world a little bit more.
Yeah.
And do it safely.
Things to plan for.
Yes,
for
exactly.
Sure.
Thought I should preface that. So at any rate, so I went and stayed with a host family for 7 weeks. We couldn't speak English. We had a bunch of rules. I turned 18 while I was there, so that was pretty fun because you could drink alcohol legally. Yeah. You could drink beer and wine at 16 and hard liquor at 18.
See, that's one of the worst things about America is you got to wait till you're 21.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have very many complaints, but that's probably one of the biggest ones.
Yep, and you can fight a war and die for your country at 18 and have a beer. So That's very interesting. That's its own topic, I think.
That's a whole other episode.
But yeah, so for me, that was a cool experience, to say the least, to just have a birthday there, no matter like what age. And I think towards the end of the trip, I probably could recall dreams in German, but
that's cool.
Yeah, it was a time before Facebook existed, so we would be on the internet for 1 hour a week writing emails.
That sounds ideal.
Yeah, it was great. And just my host family, they program did a great job of placing us with people with similar interests, at least for me. Not all my peers. There were about 22 of us, and it was post 9/11 world where people suddenly were afraid of traveling.
Right.
And I thought, not that it was dumb to be afraid of unknown, more like, how could you give up this cool opportunity? So that was between my junior and senior year in 2003. And my grandmother had been diagnosed with liver cancer while I was gone. So I just connected really well with my family while I was there. And I think maybe that was a place to be when that was going on. But yeah, I had to get selected. I had to go through a bunch of steps to get selected. It's through IU honors program in foreign language. So then the deal was you had to take an additional year of the language, because I have them in Spain, Mexico, France, and Germany for these languages.
Right. So did you choose... It sounds like you chose to learn the language first before the program. What made you pick Germany? Like, out of all the options, what really just came out with Germany?
I think I just didn't want to do Spanish like everybody else. I kind of regret that, because in my daytime life, I'm a social worker.
You'd
and
use it more.
It could be useful. Back in, let's see, I was 14 in 2000. I want to say 2000, in 1999. My 8th grade year, I had the option, and I just thought it was interesting, and then it just kind of naturally made sense. So by the time I went back for where I really got immersed, it was 4 years. So I felt like I had a good handle, not as good as some of my peers in my group, because they kind of leveled us in the grammar, but we were stretched a lot. There are a lot of different cultural experiences. There's a lot of different cultural things that have come from Germany to the U.S. when it comes to holidays. So some things look similar, but it's so many different small differences that add up to a lot of different cultures, and just generationally, like the changes of German immigrants to the U.S. And actually, the city I went to was called Krefeld, or in American speak, Krefeld. So it's the city of silk. So they had a lot of wealth there, and there were actually a lot of Mennonites who came from Germany in the late 1600s, and I think there was one vote. Somebody can fact check me, because it's been a while since I remember where I learned this in high school.
We're not experts.
So we had a lot of Mennonites come, and so that's where the Pennsylvania Dutch comes, because people couldn't say Deutsch.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So, and actually Dutch, or Nederlands, is from 600 years ago, from Old German, but the Dutchies don't really appreciate saying, oh, you came from German language. They are very proud of their own culture and language at this point, existed for 600 to 700 years. But so for me, it just was a really cool experience to get away from my family and do something really cool during the summer that I also was very passionate about. And just for me, I connected really well with the host family. So then the next summer, in 2004, I just graduated from high school, and my host family came to visit me. They drove an RV in the U.S. and traveled across the eastern part of the U.S. and got to meet my family. So that was a really cool experience, because they were kind of, and are to me, I feel like, another extension of a set of parents that were different than what I grew up with, but we just had a really great time together. And so I got to explore some of southern Indiana with them, and I had a host brother, 2 host brothers, actually. They're twins, and then a host sister, and they sent pictures. They did not tell me which one was which in the pictures. So I got pictures of them before. We didn't talk on the phone or anything, but when they picked me up, they kind of played a trick on me, which one is which. And then eventually I could distinguish which twin was which.
I gotcha.
But yeah, so they were 2 and 3 years younger than me, but close enough that it felt like peers. So we just had a really great time. They just kind of took me in. So I think that love of this connection, a language I enjoy. And I found at some point from my dad's family, his grandfather's grandmother, whatever that would be called, was German.
Okay.
From where a lot of people with the last name Meyer, depending on the spelling, is from Bavaria or Bayern, the federal state in Germany. And it's huge. It's, I think, the size like could be considered like what Texas is to the U.S. And it's kind of its own distinct culture, and they even have their own dialect of how they speak. So, you know, the part of Germany I was in was the most clear is what they said. Like, it's the best to, like, as a, I don't know if you want to say immigrant or foreigner
Right.
or person, second language learner of that language, it would be the best to go and learn and speak. And they also have a lot of Roman ruins there, which I don't know if I didn't pay attention in history class, or I didn't realize that the Roman Empire was expansive. So
Yeah. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's really just the fact that the first time that you went out of the country, it was just an absolutely, like, fantastic experience as a whole. Yeah, because when I went to school, the only options that we had were Spanish and French, and I technically took 4 years of Spanish, but it sounds like I failed out of my first year. Because, like, I don't remember anything. Like, and it was a weird situation where when I was in high school, they had it broken down to where if you did like the 4-year thing, it was your freshman year was getting a lot of the nouns and stuff like that. Your second year was learning how there were like all the verbs and how the nouns with the verbs fit. And then the third year was like the rest of the sentence. And then the fourth year was the year that you like put it all together and actually learned to like really, really speak the language and stuff like that. And I'm grossly oversimplifying that by just saying nouns and verbs, but it's mostly just everything associated with it. But going into my fourth year, our teacher retired and we got a new teacher that was just like, this is how we do it now. So I just knew a bunch of words, but not how to put them together at all. It's also worth noting that I have never been out of the country. Not because I've never wanted to, I've just never really had the opportunity. I've traveled a little bit within the United States, but it's absolutely something that now that I have like an established like career and like I've never had a job that had vacation time until my current job. So like now that I'm accruing vacation and I actually have like a backstock of money and I'm definitely more settled than I've ever been before, it's just trying to get ready for what I want to do. And I've always considered Germany one of my top like 3 places to go outside of the country. So,
really?
Yeah, I was just really curious what it was for you. For me, I'm a history buff. So a lot of my places that I want to go are like just to learn the history of the place. So like I've always considered like Germany would be fantastic. I would love to go to like Japan. I think Japan would be an awesome place to go. Mostly just because a lot of like literature and some really cool stuff that's come out of there. I would really love to go to like England. Like there's so many places I just want to soak up like the history of it because like I'm constantly reading history. So the places that I read about would be really cool to see in person.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more living history there, and you know, people can take it one way or the other, but to be in a cathedral, even if it's not used for the purpose of a place of worship, which a lot are still especially in bigger cities, they'll still have, and I think they have that here too, but not as much because the cathedrals are a lot older and more grand, I think, in Europe. But I've seen a lot of cathedrals, and a lot of it's kind of blurred in my mind, but just the splendor and just the wealth in those buildings is just not something you see here. And I think for me, it's like I always wanted to say in the German city name, but like Cologne or Köln, where the cologne, like the perfume that came from there. There's the Kölner Dome or the Cologne Cathedral. It's weird to say in English for me.
Yeah.
But at any rate, they've been continually working on that for hundreds of years because it's been destroyed, it's been built up, and I think it was 60%, can be fact-checked again because it's been a minute, about 60%, I think, of Germany has been rebuilt since World War II.
Right.
So, you know, and I always just kind of, my hair technically is blonde naturally when I was younger, and now it's more brown, but I dye it red, and I have blue eyes. So some people would make jokes about like Aryan stuff, but I'm like, I'm just like, okay, like I don't care about that.
That's
but
some low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. But I also had like to add, we had a family friend. Her name is Anne Dickey. She had married an American soldier. She had immigrated from Silesia, which was a resource-rich area of former Prussia, which she was pretty bitter about the fact that Germany after World War II did not get that part. So there's a lot of German-speaking culturally Polish people who have that kind of ancestry, and so she was always pretty bitter about like here's what her Germany was. That's no
that's
more.
interesting.
Yeah, and there is a lot of immigrants from Poland, from Turkey. Actually, it's another thing and talk about. Just in Germany, there's a lot of different immigrant groups, and I would have never thought anything other than just German, like German,
Right.
like not so much about how welcoming now that country is to people, even where I'm all for integration of different cultures and adapting and kind of respecting whatever culture you're in and learning language. I think it's hard, though, for different cultures kind of all mesh together, but it's a very open country as far as immigration wise. It's pretty easy compared to some countries to immigrate, and so some of the cultural clashes with I think some of the Turkish migrant workers whose families stayed around. There's I think the biggest population of Turkish people are in Berlin, outside of Turkey, because they had a pretty good setup of working there, and then some people stayed. And so they have these different cultures that kind of exist. I mean, there's the German dominant culture, but Germans are pretty adaptable. Like, they want to learn the language, they want to understand the culture.
Yeah.
They're great travelers. Like you talked about vacation, they get so much more time. My host mom was, like, I think a pharmacist, and her husband, the father was a teacher, and they had a pretty good setup. They had an old barn that was their home, but most people in Europe, and I think in Europe and in Germany in particular, don't own home, but they had owned a home, and they had a pretty good life. And I'm like, how is a teacher, like, that's the difference. And I think they value education quite a bit there, and just all of these poets and different thinkers have come from Germany. And then the time of World War I, and then we have a depression there that hits here but hits there harder, and then Hitler takes power. And so there are all these memorials, not to glorify Hitler but to remember the atrocities. So it is integrated in their education. They're like, we learn about Hitler, we learn how awful this is, we never want this happening. So it's they're always carrying that, not shame about who they are as Germans, but more just the shame of this period of time that can't be denied.
Right. Well, it shows an importance of history, just like totally, because most people, especially like in high school, I know I didn't really get into history until like after high school, because most people are like, oh, why do I just need to learn about some old dead guy? It's like, well, maybe that old dead guy did some horrid things that if we don't know about it could happen somewhere else. Or maybe that old person, it just depends on where you are. But like, learning history is the essence of progressing to grow from that root that is our history, which I think is what's fascinating about traveling. Because if you go anywhere, basically, because the United States is very new, like when it comes to like in relation to societies around the world, we're basically a newborn baby still to a certain degree. So it really baffled me when you look at the history of other areas. It's like, oh, there's some cathedral that's like from the 1300s that's still standing. We don't have anything like that. The closest thing that we would have is like, temples and stuff from like Native Americans that are left over, but we don't have anything that's like huge cathedrals and like huge architectural projects and stuff like that when it comes to like a more modern look at it. And to me, that would be one of the most fascinating things to look at, is to see something that is so much older than you in an almost incomprehensible way for somebody who's alive today. And some of them are still in function and are used still. And I always just thought that was like a beautiful thing about history as well, is that no matter how old we get or what happens after we're gone, history is always there, and it's always going to be what our and everybody's stories are. But yeah, you've been to more places than just Germany.
Yeah. So, and kind of just going along with the progression of my life. So I went to college. I studied music for a hot minute at Butler, and then wasn't happy in life, wasn't really keeping up with certain classes in music. So I came back home, kind of reevaluated, and went down my trajectory, and now I'm a social worker. But I took a summer and lived with my host family and just lived with them, and we traveled around. It was an amazing experience. That was back in, I want to say, 2004 5. So I went back in the summer after my senior year. We did a tour of Europe where we sang with this choir group of people selected across the state. And I don't remember the name of the group, but my parents encouraged me to go. It was just really cool. My host family went and visited me 7 hours away from where they lived in a little town called Rothenburg. And it's a medieval town that has been preserved that I don't believe was destroyed in World War II. But it wasn't even the same part of Germany, and they made the time to come. So that was pretty cool. And we, of course, went to, like, England. We went to France, a few other places. So I got to go to 7 countries in 3 weeks. I do not recommend that. I recommend going 1 and 2 places. But the cool thing is rail is really great there. Public transportation is amazing. Like, I hate cars because of our dependence here. I loved it there, not having to drive, because you could get around pretty much anywhere, unless you're somewhere really remote. But generally, it's pretty easy to get around because not everybody has a car. It's pretty expensive to own a car in Europe, at least from my understanding. It's like thousands of dollars to have your license in Germany, and they have really stringent rules about like the rules of the road. But then there's the Autobahn, which most of it you can drive whatever speed, but there are speed traps, there are speed points. They'll take your picture. No cop is going to pull you over, like on the Autobahn or whatever, or in a town. They'll just take a picture and send the ticket to you, essentially. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, my host mom she said it was the ugliest picture she ever had, because she's like stooped over. You can't really see me, but stooped over and just looks kind of tired. And they send the picture and they're like, it's a €20 fine.
Yeah, that is kind of funny though.
And then the money system changed, like, the euro, all opinion aside, kind of unified things for a while, I think. And money there was worth more than here for a while, which I don't know, people thought that would have happened. But yeah, so then fast forward, I went and volunteered, did like an organization, did a program where I got to be in Germany and Kenya. So this one organization I went with for about 7 months. And I wanted to go to a dual language program, so I did. So everything was in German and English, which was pretty cool, because I feel like it's a muscle, right? Your brain, if you don't use language, you lose it. And I just kind of get amused at how they taught you. Language isn't probably the best approach, but like you said, if you don't have the opportunity, I was fortunate in that part of my parents always supported some of it, but there was a lot that I just raised the money or worked or found fundraisers. So I found ways to go, and I was not, impoverished growing up. So I had the benefit of my basic needs were met, so I could explore these things that I think are really vital, and everybody should get the opportunity. And if you can't afford it, then an organization should give scholarship to make it available to everybody.
I gotcha.
So
when it comes to anything I did with school, for the most part, I wouldn't have had a reason to do any kind of an exchange or anything like that, because I went for accounting, so I just went to the Kelly school at IU or IUPUI, so there's not really a reason. I mean, there is. You can definitely go learn foreign business, but that's not really what my degree was in. So yeah, I didn't really try to create opportunities for myself either. Which is just kind of a weird dynamic to be in, because I've always been very financially focused on building to where I'm at this second. So it was weird a couple years ago when I finally got my job that I consider my career just kind of I guess it's kind of the equivalent of Thanksgiving dinner when you're full, but you unbutton your pants and you're like, oh, I got plenty of room. So it was I finally got my job and I'm settled, and now I'm just I can do a lot more now. Which is a cool feeling to have, because then you just think of all the stuff that you want to do. All of the stuff that you've been talking about just sounds like something I would want to experience. And though I can't go and do the host family stuff, I can still, go and experience these places on my own. And I'm really looking forward to in the next couple of years, once the world opens back up, to kind of do these things. So one thing that I thought was interesting that you mentioned is the fact that you were in Germany, but then you went to France, and then you went to different places. And just like how I brought up that we don't have ancient buildings, if you and I take a 3 or 4 hour drive, it's we're in Ohio, or we're in Michigan, or we're whatever. But you do that, and you've passed through a few countries. when you're in Europe. And that's another thing that fascinates me, because like obviously there's differences between states, clearly. Like we are, Indiana's nothing like California, and California is nothing like Texas, and Texas is nothing like, but to your closest neighbors, that's where you're more like, if we go to Ohio, we're just going to be talking to relatively similar people, just a slight variation of it, but it's still the United States. But just completely having like a border where the culture completely changes so close to you is a fascinating thing. Like, it's so cool, and it's just going between those so easily is a really awesome thing to be able to do.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it's called the Schengen Treaty, Schengen Law, something with Schengen. I should have probably read about that before I came. But yeah, going across borders, I think with the Euro had made it easier. There was a lot more unity. But yeah, there are distinct cultures. Like, I would not say Germans and French people are the same. I think there's a lot of elements as far as, you know, maybe old buildings and, you know, like the own distinct culture and the impact of World War I, World War II on Europe. I think you can see some of that stuff. And countries where there was, in Germany, there was the GDR, which was occupied, you know, by 4 different powers. And unfortunately, for decades, and people died in this, there was, you know, 2 parts of Germany. Like, when people say East and West Germany, that's not a thing anymore. It's all one united Germany for the last 20 plus years. And I'm old enough, I'm 35, so I would have been a kid, but I would have been old enough to probably, if I lived in Germany, remember it on TV when the wall
tear down this wall.
I was a very little kid, but you know, I think just we don't understand that. I think there's a lot of division right now, but just imagine you live in Berlin, or you live in like these different federal states, which are now occupied by the Russian like federation, basically, and just the oppression there. Nobody died when they tortured people per se, as far as if somebody was taken political prisoner in that time, because I went to go to the GDR, like basically where they took people, interrogated them. Your neighbor could have been a spy against you. So it's just fascinating. These are things that could have been things that you and I could have grown up in, and it could have continued if, you know, certain events wouldn't have stopped. I think with the Cold War and the Red Scare, and just the fear with people of like, are you a spy? But and the buildings being, because I also lived in far eastern, near about 30 kilometers, maybe 20 miles, something like that, whatever the conversion is, I'm not sure, but it's close to Poland and Czech Republic. So I got to go to Czech Republic twice and just see the difference from like the cultures are much colder and they're much more warm in the western part near Holland, where I spent most of my time, but I got to see kind of 2 extremes and travel most of that country. But yeah, and then even from that program I was at, then I went to Kenya, and I lived in Kenya for 2 months, and I had planned to go back. That kind of evolved and changed. It didn't end up working out that way, but you know, I got to do a lot of meaningful stuff with like a youth programming, and I got to see more of extreme poverty.
So what took you to Kenya? What was the thing that brought on that 2-month stint that you lived there?
So when I was in the program, they kind of put us in an outreach program to go for a couple months to go to another culture. So they just kind of selected which one to put us in based on, I'm not sure if it was our interest. I can't remember how they placed me with my group. There were like 70 of us in this program, and there were, I want to say 10 or so countries that people went, but we had a guy in our program whose family was from Kenya. So we went to Mombasa, which is very Muslim. Most people think of Kenya like they think of Nairobi, and they think of safari, and they think of the tribal people, the Maasai, who live there, that are actually nomadic across parts of Africa, but they have like those the tribal stuff you see at like these markets that you would think of, beautiful garments and different things that are brought back that were like warrior tribes. So like I never did the safari because nobody in my group could really afford it. It was like a volunteer program. So there are people from, I want to say 15, 20 countries that came. They all could speak English. Some couldn't speak German, which was interesting going to Germany. I thought, I just never had the mindset like I'm going to learn a language, and just whether it's like my brothers who could speak pretty fluent Spanish, or me speaking German, or my mom speaking Russian. I think in my family, people have an aptitude for and an interest in world culture. So I think I had that going for me. So it was just interesting being around some people who didn't. And some people learned through just pure immersion, which I think is the best way, but also hard if you don't have some sort of structural. But people do it here all the time,
Right.
Come here and don't speak a language, or maybe they learn it in school, but they don't know how to put it together, like you said. Yeah. And it might show in the way they talk, but then they navigate that. So yeah, and then we kind of helped this school, which the kids weren't all orphaned per se, but a lot of them had a father who might be a day laborer, and the mom is just focused on raising kids. So some of the kids are kind of latchkey kids. We have a lot of kids that we gave shoes to because they were just pretty impoverished, or they had ringworm, so we get them treated for malaria because malaria is pretty common there. And the medicine's only about $2, but the wages aren't, at the time I was there, I can't speak to now. My experience is kind of with Kenya, and in terms like current history of having visited, haven't been since I want to say 9 years ago was the last time I was in Germany, and then I want to say 10, 12 years ago, something like that, it was in Kenya. So I can speak to, that time and my experiences there, and just how welcoming like the women and the children were. A fun phrase would be like Mzungu, which means like, I think all intents and purposes is kind of like Westerner, foreigner, white person, like, and it wasn't meant to be bad. I was just like, oh my gosh, like why are all these people saying like, but, people said to me, because I never had somebody in the U.S., nobody's going to be like, hey, white lady, like hey, you look like maybe you're from Europe, or whatever, your identification marker that you can't, like, really take away. I'm a white, tall woman in Kenya, and people are, like, curious. So,
right. Well, seeing somebody that looks like you is a very rare sight, probably for most people in Kenya, I would assume, right? Just because of like the lack of probably tourism there, although the safari, like, I don't really know, I don't know much about Kenya at all. So
Mombasa is not as what's the word, it's an old slave trading port. There's a lot of Indians who immigrated there, which I wouldn't have thought that about Kenya.
I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, when I saw Indian people in Kenya, I was like, huh? And then, there are white people who came there from a variety of means. And then in Nairobi, it's much more, I don't want to say Western, because I don't want to take away and say, like, as a pejorative about, like, non-Western cultures, but it was more like just like a regular city. People were dressed more the same way you'd see in a regular city, whereas in Mombasa a lot of women were dressed in burqa, or like they had the more traditional garb. And you see that, I think, even here you'll see people have pride in their different tribes, and there are like 42 to 50 tribes in Kenya.
That's insane.
Yeah, and people speak English. A lot of times they'll speak English and Swahili in big cities, and a tribal language. Some people don't know tribal language because they grew up in a city. Some people don't know English. I couldn't imagine living in a country where, I think it would be great if people just all spoke 2 to 5 languages. But yeah, it was just interesting. And then the dynamics there, and even, as a woman, I didn't leave the complex after it got dark.
Right.
They said, not to be really crazy, but this was just a reality, and I never felt unsafe, but I would always put my bag in front of me on the ferry or wherever we were. Like, let's say some people like cut into bags and steal stuff like just out in the open, or be in a taxi and like reach in and stole my host sister's cell phone, so she had to get a new one. But there was a guy that got in a dispute with somebody. I think he he wanted whatever he had, and he killed him with a machete to like rob him for probably not that much. And that happened not far. So I mean, they had a reason for like these safety things. I'm like, I'm this white girl who is open to world travel and cultures and know that there are different environments, but that is not in my worldview.
Right.
But I kind of just accepted, like, it's not that I ever felt unsafe because I was always with my host family, and I considered to go back and work with the school there. And
it's also one of those things where you probably just have to take the precautions. Like, since you're not from the area, you have to trust the people that are telling you that kind of stuff. Because, like, the thing about the guy getting robbed, was that somebody that was, like, part of your group, or was that just a story you heard?
No, it was just a real situation, and they said that they had a complex where essentially there was a guard. I don't know if he was armed or not, but essentially there was a gate, and he would watch it, so it kind of helped deter people. And we weren't in a rich area. It's just they had their own home, and the mother of our leader, I guess it would be, he and his fiance, who was from Switzerland. It was really cool to see like that intercultural relationship and the differences of the culture that they got together. Just how open they were, and they were used to Westerners, I guess if you call it. But I think some of the things I think about is, you know, a lot of developmental or, you know, issues that are facing like Africa and other countries where there's more like, I think it is in Colombia, which I went to. I have a friend who's from Colombia, who lives in Puerto Rico now, and I went with her to Bogota, where she's from, which is a beautiful city. The people are beautiful there. But like 80, I think to 85% of people, give or take, are in poverty. Like, she is not. And they are very much like, you would be in class too, which I'm like, I don't have that kind of money, but I'm glad you accept me as part of your class. Like, they're like the step under the politicians. So like they have these classes.
So there's actual like a breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah, but 85% of people are impoverished, and that just breaks my heart. Now, when I was with those friends, I love my friend, and they have resources, and that's great. They came from like business families and educate and all that. But, you know, it just kind of is a reality of people are not living in these nice little situations and things that we have that you take for granted, like, not to make people sad, but just a reality. There was a baby that mimicked what mom was doing about, like, sticking his hand out for, like, food and then bringing the hand to the mouth. Like,
oh, I got
I want food, I want money, essentially. And even just, you know, going to the market, and because I'm white, like, people are like, oh, you'll pay more. So they try to get me they do all the bartering. And so my host mom kind of taught us here prices, because I would do the grocery shopping for my group. And, you know, we did our best to cook while we were there, but cooking without the same style of kitchen stuff, and it's hard to refrigerate like dairy, so there's not a lot of that. But like the produce was amazing. We tried some interesting foods while we were there. Nothing like, no bugs, I've not done that yet, but like goat, I've never had that. Or fish heads that were fried, that was pretty cool. Or just a bunch of different, you know, fresh food that here is so much more processed. But just even when I had to get medical care down there, that people tried to nickel and dime me for more at the market. People were like, oh, you're buying. So then I had 5 people like follow me around hoping I'd purchase, like, my child needs medical attention, and trying to play. I'm like, I don't know what they think, like, I'm here as a volunteer. I raised all this money through churches or working through people I know, you know. And so it was just, I wanted to go back, and I learned some Swahili, like Jambo, Karibuni, Kenya. It's like, you know, and I think a lot of people's reference to Swahili and maybe Kenya or Africa in general is like, it's just kind of mixed. And I think it's, you know, Africa is not one place. Right. It's actually very large. And I don't know, I think the U.S. can fit into part of Africa, but, you know, my hope is that people kind of take away from hearing about other cultures is wanting to learn more about the world. And you know, it was like warm climate culture, and we went there in January, which was the hottest time of the year. Right.
That has to do with like the hemispheres. Yeah. I remember hearing about that for the first time, that when you're in the southern hemisphere, the seasons are basically reversed. And it's so weird to think about, because, like, especially once again, I've always been in the United States. in like around the Indiana area, and it's going to be cold this time, it's going to be hot this time, and just imagining the opposite is just odd, because like we associate, because like even our holidays are essentially based around that same like cycle of weather, because it's like once October rolls around and Thanksgiving and like Christmas, a snowy season, like all the music associated with the time is about snow and the cold weather and stuff. And just if you're trying to celebrate Christmas in the Southern Hemisphere and you're saying about snow and it's like, it's hot as balls out here. Like,
I'm sure that's what they said in Kenya.
Right.
It's hot as balls. No.
Yes, exactly. But no, I'm still kind of hung up on the fact that you said that like it's odd to me that they had like a specific like class system. And
that was in Bogota, like in Colombia.
Right.
Like she was just
very blunt about it.
She was very blunt, like, and I think proud that like I fit in with their top 2 level. And it's if they ever listen, like I love my friend. I just thought I was kind of struck by that because
it's got to be off-putting's not the unsettling, maybe.
It's just an awareness that the world is not. I guess in the U.S. you can quote unquote be what you want, but I preface that like depends on what you look like and your background. So there are levels, like we think of different strategies. Like we're not as obvious about, like you and I might be considered like what they call like middle class.
Right, yeah.
But we could be a lot of a difference income gap, but it's more kind of how you function.
Well,
but
it's also technically not an official thing.
Yeah.
So it's not like because you make this much, here's your card that says you're middle class or you're lower class or you're higher class. But like when you said it's like, oh, you would fit in tier 2, it's like it's an official thing, like you are categorized in it.
And I don't know if it's like official. I just think it's like just a known thing there. Yeah. Just like I think India, although the caste system is illegal, I think there's very much like, and we still have that here, the glass ceiling. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
If you're upper class, you're not really going to be the same as somebody who's middle class or upper middle class. Like there are, from sociology, there are different strategies of levels you might fall in. But it's more flexible here, and you might change from one to the other. Right. It's easier to go down to impoverished than I think the other typically. But yeah, just it was interesting, like, genuine people in hunger, and there weren't, like, in Kenya, there were children that I remember meeting that were, I think, had some sort of physical disability of some sort, or maybe a mental disability. Intellectual disability is a word I'm trying to think of. And they weren't in school. Like, it was not embarrassing. Maybe it felt like culturally shameful. And there weren't the resources, and even some of the abuse that I would say would have happened to some of the kids, like not getting shoes, getting ringworm, getting burned by, I don't know what it was. Some of the kids were getting abused that we're dealing with. And there might be, but I just didn't get the sense that really people went to like child services to go intervene. There's just these stressors, but it's a beautiful place, and like I don't like the image of Kenya, like, or any country really, that these poor people, let me go as a white person, like white savior complex, like okay. Just kind of feeling like, look at me, like putting yourself on Instagram, look how cool I am volunteering. Like that was never, I was in college when Facebook started, and then I didn't really get on the Instagram train until this year to be off the Facebook train at this point. And
no, I mean, I literally created social media just so I have something for this show.
Sure.
So like when it comes to personal social media, I think I technically at certain points like created one just so people would stop asking me about it. And then there was one point at work, at my job, where they were like, oh, we can connect you to the company through Facebook. So I just threw some shit together. But like I'm not really a big advocate for personal like social media for the most part. I think it gets people in trouble more than it helps, especially with what it kind of geared itself towards and become. Mm-hmm. Like I completely understand the aspect of like, oh, I use it to keep up with family from across wherever they're from. I completely support that, but I don't need to know how many shits you take in a day and what food you're eating to cause those shits. Like it doesn't matter to me. Like, I want to hear important stuff for the most part.
Yeah.
So I completely understand what you mean by not really getting into the social media train until, recently.
Yeah. I mean, I used Facebook where I think I had more people from other countries on some level that were connected to me. And then I just kind of, because if you can't go visit people, like, sometimes I had every intent to go to certain places and life led me a different way. My last time in Germany, and I thought, I honestly had hopes to, like, when I was pursuing singing, that somehow that maybe I would be a singer abroad and live abroad and do some sort of classical singing. But that wasn't really a formed idea because you have to translate it to all these years of training. And while I still sing, I have all that training and love music, and that was something I was considering as a different topic. I think this is kind of universal for people about just what the world is like. And so my last time in Germany, I was in Berlin, and I was working with a program, and I remember I only stayed 4 months. I was not doing well with my mental health. I was just ended up first time I ever really missed family back home. I wasn't trying to get away from people. Like, I wanted to come back home and finish my social work degree. I had 1 semester left. Some stuff had happened, so I just, knew there were unfinished things. And I just remember being upset. Like, I had planned this a year to go for that time. But I went to Berlin, and it was a really cool city. It's a very artistic city. It's got a lot of education. There's a lot of history. It's completely its own thing, like New York City, and a lot of people there speak English. So sometimes people really just want to practice English. So, like, when I went back in 2003, people were like, "Oh, great, I can speak English." And I said, "No, I have to speak German with you, and I'm here for that." So, great, yeah. I want an American to speak English with. But not everybody always knew where I was from, because I guess how my body language was and my facial features look more European, I guess. I don't know. I look the way I look. But some people would detect, like, some sort of accent that said variety of stuff, and American was kind of on there. But I worked really hard to just kind of blend in with my surroundings, but take the things from America that I loved, and that's part of who I am. But I kind of feel like I'm more of a world citizen in a lot of ways, and I'd like to go back, and I'd like to make that not be my last time. And going somewhere in Asia, in particular, I've always wanted to go to India, and a lot of times it was like a program that got me involved. So if people are interested in listening, like, there's different groups, based in your hometown. There might be like philanthropic groups that would support going, or you want to do like development work. I remember I was in grad school 4 years ago. 4.5 years ago, I graduated with my master's in social work. So when I was 30, I was considering doing Peace Corps, and just something didn't sit well with me about going, but I was considering going to Thailand and doing development work with youth. And so, like, even there, that's an opportunity. You're a volunteer, but your expenses are low, but you just have to be willing to, move your life for like 2 years to do it. And not everybody can do it.
Right.
There are only so many that are English speaking opportunities. A lot of them are in French and Spanish. But I think I had every intent with my social work background to go more the global development side. So we'll see kind of where it takes me. Back to like Randy and I, he's been to Germany, and we'd like to go back there, and I'd like to go visit my host family, and the kids are now grown, and so I'm sure they have certain opinions about what's happening here, and probably concern for my well-being. And it's just like when you have all these experiences, I think they kind of carry with you. So like for me, I have more of a broad lens about the way the world could be, and there are different ways that they can be. And I think, having been to Mexico a couple times, been to Kenya, been to places where I am not the majority as far as skin tone, and even in the US, like, I don't think white people are really the majority anyways anymore. Like, there's a lot of variations on skin tone. I stuck out in these places, so I had to kind of face that. I don't blend in with everybody. Like, I want to just blend in. I'm a teenager, and I stick out like a sore thumb here in this town where everybody's like a foot shorter than me,
Right.
and I'm this pasty, blonde-haired girl. But yeah, I think it's just important to kind of, when it makes sense and when it's safe, to put yourself out there and find the opportunities. And nobody told me, hey, you should definitely do this. I just had opportunities, and my hometown is very interested in the globe as far as with Cummins, back to that. And my parents were supportive. So, I think, like, just to encourage you, anybody else, when it makes sense, use the vacation days. Not everybody is that lucky, and I recognize, like, I'm a social worker, so I recognize people don't always even leave their own town.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think the most important thing that or the reason that I would like to travel, is because you truly do learn what certain places get right, and you can read about it all you want, but until you experience it, you don't really have a grasp on it, like, you can learn as much as you want about whatever, but until you have the physical thing in your hand, that's when the practicality comes in of it. And having that worldview, regardless of what you think where you're from does good or bad, it's always worth it to have in your, like, mental tool belt, that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And not only does it not have to be that way, but if you can take the good from everything, that's really how, as a society, you push forward as a people. And I think that's honestly the best thing that can come out of world travel. And I mean, this is speaking as somebody who's never been outside the U.S., mostly just speaking from different cultures I've seen within the U.S. But I think that's a great take on it. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to go over or talk about? I mean, we still got time. It's not like we're restricted or anything.
I think just, something that was interesting that I was telling some people, and this memory came up to mind, was when I first went to Germany when I was 15. I had only 2 years of German, so I had a great German teacher. He actually would, like, translate stuff, and he was great. His wife had got cancer, so he had to leave in the middle of the trip.
Wow.
And then we had a different teacher who I was friends with her daughter for a period of time. She was German, I want to say, like, came from Germany and, like, immigrated to the U.S. I might be not totally telling her history correct, but she was great too. She came in halfway through. It was very interesting to have that happen. But his wife had got diagnosed with cancer, and so he was strict, but he was a good teacher, and he had to leave. So I had, like, 3 different German teachers, and my 8th grade teacher came back for, like, the end of high school, and I don't know when she had last been to Germany, but when I was there, and there's McDonald's everywhere, right? So we were just stopping there, I think, because it was quick. It wasn't necessarily, like, our preference as people who want to eat the local food. Is not Germany. Although, like, the German McDonald's is not the same as the McDonald's here, but there is some crossover. So I said I'd like a water. I ordered in German, and they give me a glass of, I looked down and see it's, like, carbonated, or I didn't even know. I just took a drink and I was like, oh my gosh. So it turns out, like, carbonated water is a big thing there, and, like, people have, like, the soda streams here now. Well, they had those before there were soda streams. My husband was like, oh, or you add the syrup and you can make it like your own soda. And they have Apfelschorle, which is, like, apple juice is carbonated. They have, like, Mesomic, which I think is cola and like carbonated orange juice or whatever. So that's pretty good. So
that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it is. So it's a much more European thing, I think, to like mineral water. And then, like, the faucet water, like, people there don't really like, to my understanding. People will drink it, but it just was interesting. Like, I was so disgusted initially, and now I really like carbonated water. I just find it refreshing, like a club soda, like a gin and tonic. Like, I'm all about that. I find, even just lime squeezed in club soda. And at the time I was like, what is this? And so they told me, they kind of gave us some, like, tips, and we did some language cultural training. They're like, this is a common thing. And even like in Hamburg, that's where like the German rap started. And German rap is pretty cool to listen to. So I'm not really into rap here, but I really enjoyed rap from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like Rammstein and different groups that are German that people know like that. But yeah, and then Falco, like, gotta love some like electronic, like 80s German music that kind of like, and then the DJ scene in like Berlin. And
yeah.
I never got to go to like any cool clubs in Berlin. Like the last time I was there with my friend that I bonded with while I was there. She was from India and she had a job there, and we just kind of randomly became friends. But, you know, just like, it was just fun, like that, you know, to be able to kind of gain a lot of my formative, I guess, if you will, like young adults, teenage years, into my mid-20s. A lot of my experiences have been shaped, I feel like, more of being trying to live abroad and then keep coming back. And, you know, I'm settled here, but I mean, I never thought I'd say that, you know, but I think, you know, depending the age you are, you want different things in life, right? But I think always getting the opportunity to travel when you can, because there might come a time when you can't. You know,
like
and
now.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm glad my parents encouraged me, even though my grandmother passed away right after my senior year, after I came back from the Europe tour. I was really appreciative that they supported that, because I was like, I can't afford to do this, because I normally raised the money and worked, and I was just so busy preparing for college, and my grandmother was really sick. I didn't really work my senior year of high school. I was very fortunate. I didn't have to worry about that, but just that was kind of a stabilizing force. But yeah, traveling wasn't always comfortable, and there were certainly probably things I did where I had to learn from, like, you know, or I didn't know the word in German, so I'd like use a lot of words to get to that. But that helped my vocabulary. And even like the freedom at saunas and at pools, like public pools, to be somewhat naked, like
nice.
Until you see that they're like, you know, like not like really like physically fit people necessarily. It's just like
it's a huge joke though. Yeah. It's like, man, how many movies from like when we were kids where it was a joke where the kids would try and sneak onto the nude beach or whatever, when in reality it's mostly like older people.
Yeah,
like,
they're just comfortable with their body, and it's just F.K.K. or Freie Kultur, Körper Kultur, and I might be saying it wrong. It's like free body culture. It's like nudity is not a thing to be ashamed of, you know, but I've
seen the mirror. I don't.
It's just, it's a body, and so there's no shame. I think Americans, they would say, are so prudish. Like, Germans are more reserved until you get to know them, but once you're friends for life is kind of the phrase. But yeah, like, Americans are just so prude, but then, like, you know, they think of, like, fast food and, like, people being fat, which isn't necessarily far off from some, but, you know, I think people are complex, so I think they appreciate, they'd be like, I don't understand your government. Like, and I'm like, well, I also am like this, you know, in my mind, this nerdy, like, church-going choir girl is awkward and figuring out things and into the arts and stuff, and, you know, like I said, like, encouraged to think and travel. Like, I'm not the voice of anybody except me. So do I say, yeah, I mean, it's kind of this way, but I kind of liked how they do stuff of like 6 to 10 parties that have to kind of cooperate between a majority and then a minority party to like be the parliaments. And there's a president who doesn't really do much of anything. He's more just a figure. Yeah, the Chancellor Merkel, she's pretty brilliant, you know, and the German conservatives are more like our Democrats, I guess, if you will. So things are more, you know, there's a variation of what's acceptable, and
for sure
you can be kind of a variety of things there. But yeah, I just value, you know, all those experiences and appreciate that I got a chance to kind of not relive the good days, but just kind of remember like what has kind of shaped me, and just, you know, I don't always get to do in-depth conversation now because I'm kind of live my life here, and I value my community here. And I think, you know, for all the times that I went abroad, I've learned to appreciate Indianapolis for all its good and bad, and the U.S. for the good, bad, the ignorant, the great, Right. So, yeah, we'll kind of see where, I really, think I grieve the ability to travel a little bit right now. So I'm hoping.
I definitely think that's something that's hit everybody in some way or another. Even for people that didn't get a chance to travel much, it's just the options of, or it's the lack of option.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I would love to go here, but I just kind of can't right now. It's not working out. And then just being blatantly told, like, you can't. Like, even if you wanted to or you could, no. Like, that's a completely different attitude towards it.
Yeah, it would have been nice to, like, if we, and I'm not joking when I say this, I kind of use humor to kind of cope with things at times because I think humor is helpful. But, yeah, I think about if I could have left the U.S. and just been gone during the pandemic, that would have probably been a smart idea just to get stuck abroad. But then thinking about you're away from people if something happened, like, and you can't even get to them.
Right.
There was a journalist who moved to Germany. I don't know if she speaks German or not, but I think she got a job doing stories for some sort of news station. And she talked about being abroad and sometimes feeling that guilt of being somewhere where the precautions are more in place, not to get political or into people's views on pandemic. I don't want to go there, and nor do you. I think we're just more of just a standpoint of like, well, it's really cool, like, to be somewhere where, you're going to experience something, but, like, we can't just go. I don't even think we can go to, like, anywhere except, like, a state. I don't know what countries would let us right now.
I know that there's a certain amount that are allowing it when it comes to, like, you have to get tested before and on your way back, and there's certain, like, quarantine procedures and stuff like that, but I'm not educated enough on that to really speak for it.
Yeah.
It's just weird, the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, and people always wanted the U.S. dollar and always loved America, and, like, people in Kenya, I think, mostly really loved Americans and valued it, and Germans really liked American people. They didn't really appreciate our government, and I think just the system is totally different. So I'm like, well, this is not the system like you're used to, but I just think it's just interesting the times we're living in. I really hope that we can figure out where those, boundaries are not, it's not to the point where we can't ever not, like, we aren't restricted. Some countries, people can't go certain places because of the country they're from.
Right.
Or I remember one of the ladies from a group I was in, she was from Philippines, and it's like, she cannot go to certain countries because it would be unsafe for her because of something about the targeting of whatever country. I don't even know what country, but there was somebody who's from Philippines or, has that descent would speak more, but she shared about that. So it's just interesting, like, I know somebody who went to Egypt before all of the rebellion stuff, and then you couldn't go for a while. Now it might be a little bit better pre-COVID. But yeah, just like things change and they're so fickle. Yeah.
It kind of really conceptualizes the idea of, like, what governments really do and how different they can be. Because I don't want to say I love politics. That's not the right word. I am really into politics. Like, every day I listen to a little bit of news and politics. When it comes to American politics, I really enjoy learning about it and understanding what's going on. I like that I know current events and stuff like that, but I've never really dove into much foreign agencies when it comes to government, which is also extremely important to know. But there's so many. It's one of those things where it's like, how do you even narrow down what you would look into? It's more along the lines of, like, I feel like as long as I know my stuff, if something's brought up, I have a comparative base. But yeah, it is super interesting how the entire world's adjusted to this thing completely different from another.
Yeah, and like you said, like, I'm probably guilty of not being as globally minded about everything everywhere. And I was talking.
I think it's impossible to a certain degree.
It is impossible to know about every single country, but that's kind of why, like, I think BBC is probably one of the more unbiased opinions. And kind of like when I was on Facebook, you could see stories, because I think just like where I lean, like, on wanting education and research-based stuff, I just want that, like, a valid source of information. I don't want, like, your political spin on it. I just want, like, if the sky is blue, which we know that it's not technically blue.
Right.
I want you to tell me your source. So, like,
yes.
I want a more unbiased approach, and I feel like NPR and some of these .org.edu things, you can learn a lot more. So, and then the people that live in those cultures, because, like, you talked to me at one point about China and just kind of some of the stuff going on in different countries where there might be idea suppression. And I think there's even some of that can be happening here, with all these different ideas about who to trust and what to trust and
right.
can we trust this. But I'm like, I will be sad if we get to the point where, like, I can't get a news source here to me. But there are countries where you can't say certain words, you might
right.
get flagged.
And that's what is terrifying to me. I mean, it's literally what I base the name of my show off of, is the fact that I do enjoy the fact that we can literally talk about whatever we want, and there's nothing technically stopping us. So, like, that's literally the whole idea of the show, is talking with friends about literally anything. So it's something that I deeply appreciate, and it's why, I hold that so close to me. But I do think it's definitely cool to look at those kind of things, because it's really impossible to conceptualize everything that's a possibility, because everything is foreign to a certain degree to somebody. And it's important to note that, like, just because somebody looks at something that you look at personally, you shouldn't necessarily take it personally, because that person could have no concept of it because of the location that they're from.
Yeah, and Germans, to add to that, Germans are much more direct. I took sign language for 3 semesters at Butler University, and deaf people are much more direct. Like, and in Kenya, people are much more indirect. So, like, you'd have to ask sometimes 3 times before you get the real answer. And it's like,
right.
Damn it, just tell me, like, what you think. But that is such an American idea.
Right. No,
like, I'm going to tell your leader, maybe, but I'm not going to tell you offended me. It was just kind of interesting. Or, just, like, the different ways we communicate. As somebody from the Midwest, I talk differently, and I take things differently, and my culture is different. Like, I know I'm from the Midwest. Like, I know that's my, like, culture of origin, I guess it would be. There's
going to be, like, certain quirks to your personality that's literally just ingrained from that simple fact.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I kind of felt a relief. Like, you're not offending somebody if you're blunt. I mean, there are people who are mean in German.
Right.
And, there are people who are really indirect. But in general, I think people just, are more upfront with what they say. And they're not as flowery in their speech. And, like, Americans are pretty loud. We're pretty friendly, like, air quotes. But we don't really know how you're doing. We just, like, want you to say good. And then,
right.
So I appreciated that. And so I think I just gravitated towards that, because I'm outgoing, but I lean introverted, but I'm kind of in the middle with, like, introversion, extroversion. And so I think people can mistake that, because I'm talkative or outgoing, then I'm really extrovert. It's like, no, I really appreciate, like, some of the reservation of people who think through what they're going to say. And
I got you.
So it's just kind of interesting. Like, we didn't really talk about it, but communication styles and, like, how that relates to culture. And, if you're in a culture that's more patriarchal, like, could I as a woman be operating the same way in this culture? Maybe not. Or if it's a more open culture and people, it doesn't matter your gender as much, and, people are more open to gender expression and things. I think sometimes those, like, gender roles too kind of don't play out as much. But yeah, we definitely, like, carry our own biases and different ideas and experiences. So I appreciate it when I was challenged of, I think I upset my host sister a few times because of cultural differences, or the people I was around. I think sometimes as Americans, we didn't realize, or as Europeans and Americans and people not from Kenya, there were times where we had misunderstandings. So I think it's just kind of trying to find that common ground.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that what we've been discussing, it's really the true essence of why it's important, is because everybody to a certain degree needs to understand that it's not the differences that matter, it's where we do come together. And world travel is literally the essence of that. It's finding those common grounds. So yeah, I just think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanna talk about? You think you're...
No, I think we did kind of mostly Euro focused of my travels, but that is
right.
where most of my time. I mean, I
Yeah, for
briefly
sure.
mentioned a few other places, but yeah, I think, just strongly emphasize be safe. Like, if you are going to go somewhere, be safe right now. And when, we're in a different time of stuff, I think all these things we can still care about the world still, even though we're virtual. I think we can take advantage of connecting with people from other parts virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was going to say is, like, I also maintain my German, which I haven't been because of the pandemic stuff, but Deutsch Club, which is called German Club, it's just kind of people met up and ate together. And I know they're kind of functioning together, but it was kind of a nice way. Like, we have Germanophiles, like people in the U.S. who have either lived there or studied it, or they have family who've been from Germany, or they're Germans or from other countries, kind of gather together and come there. And there's like American German Club. They don't really do the language, but then there is a German speaking choir, and then this Heidelberg Cafe, which is here on the east side of Indianapolis, which is part of Germany. It is not like modern Germany. It's like Bavaria. It's stuff that people kind of think of as German, but it's only part of German culture. So, like, Germany is not Lederhosen only and bratwurst and sauerkraut, but that stuff is also really good, and there's a place for it. So there are places that you can go in Indianapolis. It's not as easy as I wish, like, to kind of have authentic culture. I think that kind of over time, because a lot of Americans came from Germany up to a certain point until like the mid 1800s. But yeah, I think just finding kind of connections, and if it's Spanish or whatever it is for somebody, like their interest, just kind of seeing what's local, and that might be, and doing it virtually right now until you can safely do it, with a lot of people.
Cool. Right on. Well, I really appreciate you coming down and talking. I've had a lot of fun.
Me too.
You're welcome back anytime, no matter what you want to talk about.
Awesome.
So yeah, just let me know. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. And everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something about traveling the world. And I hope at some point we can all get back out there and get to it.
That's right.
Have a good night, everybody.